The palace of Lithar once stood like a diamond among the stars. Its towers shimmered with silver light, and songs of the royal choirs echoed through the crystal halls. But now those halls were silent. The music was gone, the light was dim, and the air smelled of smoke and ashes. The war had ended, and Princess Aelira stood alone among the ruins of what used to be her world. She had been born to rule. From the moment she opened her eyes, the stars were her inheritance. Her people bowed before her with pride and called her the star-born daughter. But when the Great War began, everything changed. Empires fell, planets burned, and dreams turned to dust. Aelira watched her father fall in battle, her fleets destroyed, and her people scattered like frightened birds. When she spoke for peace, her generals called her a coward. When she refused to let more soldiers die, her own council accused her of betrayal. They said she had forgotten the honor of her bloodline. But Aelira didn't care about honor anymore. She cared about lives, about the cries of children echoing in empty streets, about the mothers who waited for soldiers that would never return. She begged them to stop the war. They didn't listen. The last thing she remembered from that day was the sound of her own people shouting at her. Their voices were sharp, filled with hate. "You are no princess of ours," they had screamed. Then came silence, the kind that cuts deeper than any blade. Now she walked through the broken halls of her palace, her steps echoing softly against the marble floor. The great banners that once carried her family's crest now lay torn and burned. The mirrors reflected not a princess, but a ghost. Her silver skin covered in dust, her long hair tangled, her royal robes turned to rags. She had nowhere to go. The Lithari Empire no longer wanted her. Her people believed she had betrayed them. Even her guards had turned their faces away when she passed. The stars outside the palace windows looked colder than ever. Once they had been her companions. Now they only watched in silence. At night she would stand on the balcony where her father once gave his royal speeches. The wind there was thin and sharp, carrying the faint smell of smoke and metal. She would close her eyes and whisper, "Forgive me. Father, I tried," but no voice answered. The universe had turned its back on her. Days passed in loneliness. She wandered the ruins like a lost child, surviving on scraps left by looters. Sometimes she found pieces of her old life. A broken crown, a faded portrait, a child's toy left behind during the evacuation. Each piece was a knife in her heart, reminding her of everything she had failed to protect. Still, she refused to cry. Her tears had dried long ago, somewhere between the screams of the battlefield and the silence of her exile. She told herself she would survive even if no one wanted her to. But deep inside, she wondered what survival meant when there was nothing left to live for. One night, a storm came, a rare thing on her dying planet. Thunder rolled across the black sky, and lightning lit the broken towers like ghosts waking from sleep. Aelira wrapped herself in a torn cloak and watched from the shadows. For a moment, the flashes of light almost made the ruins look alive again, as if the past was struggling to breathe. And then, through the storm's roar, she saw something, faint lights moving across the horizon. They were not from her people. They were not Lithari ships. Their light was golden, not silver. They came from above, steady and calm, like a quiet heartbeat in the dark. At first, she thought it was another invasion. Her body tensed, ready to run, though she knew there was nowhere to hide. But as the ships descended, she saw a symbol on their hulls, a circle crossed by blue lines. Not a mark of war, but of peace. The humans had come. Aelira had heard of them before the war, a young race from a small planet, fragile and reckless, yet strangely full of hope. Her people had once mocked them, calling them the children of dirt. But now, the children of dirt were the only ones still reaching out their hands. As their ships landed among the ruins, Aelira felt something strange stir in her chest. Not fear, not anger. Something she had almost forgotten, a small, flickering spark of hope. And though she didn't know it yet, among those humans was one man, quiet, patient, and kind, whose simple words would change the course of her life forever. The human transport ship Horizon touched down on the shattered plains of Lithar with a low hum that echoed through the ruins. Dust rose into the pale air as landing lights cut through the mist. The planet looked dead from orbit. But humanity had come anyway, to search for survivors, to offer help, and maybe to find something worth saving. Among the crew was Elias Ward, a quiet engineer from Earth. He wasn't a soldier or a diplomat. He didn't come to fight or to lead. He came to rebuild, to fix things that were broken. The scars on his hands told the story of a man who had seen too much destruction, yet still believed that things could be made right again. When the ship's doors opened, the air outside smelled of burned metal and rain. The crew stepped into silence, scanning the ruins with careful eyes. There were no voices, no movement, only the wind whispering through the fallen towers. Then, through the haze, Elias saw her. She stood at the edge of the broken plaza, wrapped in a torn cloak that once might have been royal blue. Her silver skin caught the faint light of dawn, and her white hair fluttered like threads of moonlight in the breeze. She didn't move as the humans approached. She just watched them, her face calm, almost too calm, like someone who had lost the strength to feel fear. Elias froze. He had read reports of the Lithri, tall, elegant beings, proud and cold. But the woman before him didn't look proud or cold. She looked lost. He took a cautious step forward, lowering his helmet. "Hello," he said softly. "We're here to help." She said nothing. Her eyes, a pale shade of violet, flicked toward him, then back to the ground. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it beneath her cloak. Elias pulled a small metal flask from his belt and held it out to her. "It's water, clean. You can have it." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then slowly, she reached out and took it. Her fingers brushed his hand for the briefest second, cold, delicate, almost weightless. She lifted the flask to her lips and drank in silence. "Do you have a name?" Elias asked gently. Her voice, when it came, was quiet and melodic, but heavy with exhaustion. "Names do not matter," she said. "Not anymore," Elias frowned. "They always matter," he replied. "It's what keeps us human. Or whatever your word for that is." That made her look up at him. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Hers full of sorrow, his full of quiet warmth. Then she looked away again. The other humans began setting up shelters and unloading supplies. Elias stayed near her, unsure why he felt so drawn to a stranger who barely spoke. There was something about her stillness, something that felt like a wound hidden behind a mask. Later, as the sun set, the ruins turned gold under the fading light. Elias found her sitting alone by a collapsed wall, staring at the sky. He walked over and sat a few feet away. "It's strange," he said after a while. "Your sky looks different from Earth's, but somehow the stars still feel the same." She didn't answer at first. Then in a whisper she said, "I used to know every name of every star above this world. Now I can't look at them without remembering what I lost." Elias's heart tightened. "You lost your home," he said. "But you're still here. That means you haven't lost everything." She turned her face toward him. "And what is left when no one wants you?" He hesitated, then smiled sadly. "Hope, sometimes that's all that's left. But it's enough." Her gaze lingered on him for a long moment, as if trying to understand the strange creature before her. The human who spoke softly and looked at her not with fear, but with kindness. That night she sat apart from the humans, but she watched them work, sharing food, repairing broken machines, laughing softly even after all they had lost. Their warmth confused her. Her people had always spoken of humans as reckless and crude, but these ones, they cared. They helped. They smiled even when their hands were dirty and their hearts were tired. When Elias passed by again, she found herself speaking before she could stop. "Why do you help?" He paused. "Because someone has to. Because pain doesn't last forever if we share it." She didn't understand the words completely, but something about them touched a part of her that had been silent for too long. That night, for the first time in years, the alien princess closed her eyes and didn't dream of war. She dreamed of a voice, gentle, human, and full of hope, telling her that she didn't have to face the darkness alone. Days passed quietly after the humans arrived. The air of the ruined city began to change. The smell of fire and dust was slowly replaced by the faint scent of food cooking and the soft hum of machines. The humans were rebuilding what they could, setting up shelters, fixing old systems, and bringing light back to a world that had forgotten it. Princess Aelira watched all of it from a distance. She didn't join them. She couldn't. She was still the outcast, the princess who had failed her empire, the name that her own people had spat with hatred. Every sound of laughter from the human camp reminded her of the joy she once knew, and the silence that now followed her wherever she went. Elias Ward didn't stop visiting her. Every morning he would bring her something, sometimes a meal, sometimes a small tool or a blanket. But what he truly gave her was his time. He talked to her even when she didn't reply. He told her stories of Earth, his home, a small blue world filled with rain and oceans where people dreamed even when they had nothing. At first, she listened in silence. But as days turned to weeks, she began to wait for him without realizing it. She would sit on the broken steps of the palace and pretend she was watching the horizon, though her ears always listened for his voice. One day, as the twin suns were setting, Elias found her sitting by a cracked pillar, tracing strange symbols into the dust. He sat beside her quietly. "What are those?" he asked. "They're names," she said softly.
"Names of those who died in the war?"
"My friends, my family." He nodded, not knowing what to say. Then he whispered, "We do the same on Earth. When we lose someone, we write their names too. So they're not forgotten." She looked at him. "But your people still have each other," she said. "Mine, they turned away from me." Elias sighed. "Sometimes people fear what they don't understand. Sometimes they break the ones who tried to save them." Her eyes widened slightly as if the words hit a place she had buried deep inside. "You sound like you've felt that before," she said. He smiled faintly. "Maybe. I once worked on a colony project. It failed. Everyone blamed me. They said I ruined their chance to live on a new world. For a long time I believed them, until someone told me something I'll never forget." "What did they say?" "They said you can't fix the past, but you can build something new from its ashes." Elira looked down at the dust between her fingers. "Build something new," she repeated as if testing the words. "But what if the ashes are all that's left?" Elias looked at the ruined towers, at the broken world around them. "Then we start small," he said gently. "One stone, one seed, one kind word at a time." For a long moment neither spoke. The sky turned a soft orange, painting the ruins with warmth that didn't feel like sorrow anymore. The princess had never thought the dying light could be beautiful again, but now it was. That night, as darkness fell, Elira walked near the human camp for the first time. She didn't enter, but she watched them, laughing, sharing food, helping each other without asking for anything in return. One of the soldiers gave half of his meal to a wounded Lithari child. Another fixed an alien tool with clumsy hands and a smile. The sight confused her. Her own people, proud and advanced, had let compassion die during the war. Yet these humans, fragile and imperfect, carried it so naturally. The next morning she approached the camp. The humans looked up in surprise. She stood still, her cloak fluttering in the wind, and said softly, "I wish to help." They hesitated at first, unsure if they could trust her. But Elias nodded, smiling quietly. "Then help us," he said. "We could use another pair of hands." And so she did. Elira began working beside them, repairing damaged structures, learning the tools, and sharing what little she knew of the old Lithari technology. She wasn't a princess here. She was just another pair of hands trying to rebuild something broken. Sometimes she still caught people staring, some with curiosity, others with distrust. But when she looked at Elias, his eyes were always calm, steady and full of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Respect. That night, as she lay beneath the open sky, the stars seemed a little closer. For the first time since her fall, she didn't feel like a ghost wandering through ruins. She felt alive. And deep inside her heart, something fragile began to grow, a feeling she had long forgotten the name of. Hope. The morning light touched the broken towers with a faint golden glow. For the first time in years, the old city looked alive again. The humans had built small camps around the ruins, their flags fluttering softly in the wind. Smoke rose from their fires and laughter echoed between the fallen walls. It was not the laughter of victory, but of survival. Quiet, tired, but real. Princess Elira worked among them now. She helped carry supplies, repaired broken panels, and guided them through old systems of her world. Her once delicate hands were now rough and scratched, but she didn't care. The work gave her purpose. For the first time she felt useful again, yet not everyone saw it that way. Some of her own people, those few Lithari survivors who had returned, watched her with cold eyes. They whispered behind her back, their voices sharp as knives. "The traitor walks among humans. She bows to the children of dirt. Our princess has fallen lower than any of us." Elira heard every word, but she said nothing. She had learned that silence was safer than anger, Still, each whisper cut into her heart, reopening wounds she thought had healed. One evening, she returned to her tent to find something painted across it in thick black letters, the human word she had learned only days ago. Traitor. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring at it. The humans nearby noticed, but no one spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then she quietly turned and walked away. Elias found her later, sitting on the edge of the old plaza where the fountain used to sing. The air was cool, and the stars shimmered faintly through the dust. She sat with her knees drawn close, her eyes distant and empty. Without saying anything, he sat down beside her. A few minutes passed in silence before he asked gently, "Who did that?" "It doesn't matter," she whispered. "They only wrote the truth." Elias turned to her, his brow furrowed. "The truth? You've been working day and night to help rebuild this place. You've saved lives." She shook her head slowly. "I failed my people. I led them to ruin, and now I walk among those they once called enemies. To them, I'm not a princess. I'm a stain they wish to forget." Her voice trembled, and for the first time since he met her, Elias saw tears fall down her silver cheeks. They glimmered softly in the starlight like fragments of the moon itself. He didn't try to stop her tears. He just sat beside her, letting her cry. When she finally looked up, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Why do you care, Elias? You are human. You owe me nothing." He sighed softly, gazing at the horizon where the stars met the ruins. "Because I know what it's like to be blamed for something you couldn't stop. I know what it's like to be hated just for trying to do the right thing." Elira turned her face toward him, her eyes searching his. "And how do you live with that?" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both sadness and strength. "By remembering that other people's anger doesn't define who I am. You don't need to prove yourself to anyone. You're more than their hatred, Elira. You're the reason hope is still alive here." His words struck something deep inside her, a place that had long gone cold. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she was still worth something. But years of shame were heavy. "I don't know if I can be that person again," she said softly. "Then don't try to be her," Elias replied. "Be someone new, someone who rises from her own ashes." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night air was quiet, filled only with the faint hum of human machines and the far-off whisper of wind. Then, slowly, Elira rested her hand on the cracked stone beside her. "My people once believed that stars could never die," she murmured. "But they do, they fade. They fall." Elias looked at her gently. "Maybe, but when they fall, they don't disappear. They become something new, light scattered across the sky. Maybe that's what you are now, Elira, a fallen star still giving light." Her lips trembled, and then slowly she smiled, a small, fragile smile, but real. "You speak as if words could heal," she said softly. "Sometimes," Elias said, "they can." And that night, under the broken sky, the fallen princess let herself believe just for a moment that maybe she was not lost forever. Maybe, even in her shame, she could still shine again. The days grew warmer on Lethar. The cold winds that once swept across the ruins now carried the soft hum of human machines and the laughter of rebuilding hearts. The camp had changed. Small gardens began to grow near the shelters, lights flickered in the streets again, and hope started to bloom like fragile flowers between the cracks of a broken world. Princess Elira worked among them every day. She no longer stood apart. She carried tools, repaired damaged walls, and shared her knowledge of Lethari energy systems with human engineers. The people had stopped calling her princess now. They called her Elira, and that alone felt more real than any crown she had ever worn. Elias was always nearby. He worked beside her quietly, guiding her hands when the machines confused her, laughing softly whenever she grew impatient with human tools. He never treated her like royalty, never looked at her with fear or pity. He simply saw her as a person, not a title, not a ghost of the past. One afternoon, while fixing a damaged communication array, Elira paused and looked at the horizon. The sky was glowing red and gold, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Elias followed her gaze. "Back on Earth, sunsets looked like that sometimes. We used to say the sky was healing when it turned that color." "Healing," she repeated softly, tasting the word like it was new. "Do you think a world can heal after everything it has done?" Elias wiped the dust from his hands and looked at her. Worlds don't heal, people do. And when they do, they rebuild their world piece by piece. Elira was quiet for a long time. My people, they won't forgive me, she said finally. No matter what I build, they'll always see me as the one who failed them. Elias smiled gently. Then stop building for them. Build for yourself. Build for the ones who still believe in you. Sometimes we have to let go of the past to make room for something better. His words sank deep into her heart. For so long, her life had been defined by duty, by the crushing weight of others' expectations. But now, as she stood beneath the open sky with dirt on her hands and wind in her hair, she began to see something different, a life she could choose for herself. That night, after the work was done, Elira found herself sitting with Elias near the old fountain ruins. The stars shimmered faintly above them, and the hum of generators filled the quiet air. "Tell me about your home," she said softly. Elias smiled. "Earth isn't perfect. It's noisy, crowded, sometimes cruel, but it's full of life. We argue, we fight, we make mistakes, but somehow we keep going. We plant gardens on barren land. We build cities after storms. We fall, but we always get back up." Elira listened closely, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the campfires. "Your people sound strange," she said quietly, though a small smile played on her lips. "You destroy your world and then you try to fix it again." He laughed softly. "That's what makes us human, I guess. We keep trying, even when it hurts." Elira looked up at the stars again. "I think that's what makes you beautiful," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You break, and yet you still shine." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was gentle, filled with something unspoken, something that didn't need words. After a while, Elias picked up a small piece of crystal from the ground and handed it to her. "Here," he said, "a piece of your world, keep it. One day when everything's fixed, it'll remind you of how far you've come." Elira took it carefully, holding it as if it were something precious. "Thank you," she whispered. He shrugged. "It's just a rock." She shook her head softly. "No, it's hope." The next day, the communication array they had built together finally came alive. Blue lights pulsed across its panels, and for the first time in years, a signal reached beyond Lithar's dead skies. The humans cheered, clapping each other on the back. Even some Lithari survivors smiled, though they kept their distance. Elira stood in the middle of it all, staring at the humming tower. She had helped bring her world's voice back. And for the first time since her exile, she felt proud. Not as a princess, but as Elira, a builder of something new. Elias walked up beside her, his eyes shining with quiet pride. "You did it," he said. "You did it." The words echoed in her mind long after he had spoken them. No one had said those words to her in years. No one had ever meant them like he did. She smiled, her heart full and fragile all at once. "No," she said softly. "We did." And as the stars blinked above them, the alien princess realized that hope did not come from power or crowns. It came from hands that refused to stop building, and from hearts that refused to stop believing. The communication array had brought life back to the skies of Lithar. For the first time in years, signals traveled through the void again, reaching other surviving colonies. What started as a small human relief camp was now becoming a symbol of renewal, a place where humans and Lithari worked side by side. But peace never comes without its shadows. One morning, the camp awoke to the sound of engines roaring in the distance. The sky darkened as sleek silver ships descended through the clouds, their lights flashing with the royal crest of the Lithari Council, the same council that had once cast Princess Elira out. The moment the ships landed, silence fell. The air grew heavy. The surviving Lithari bowed their heads in fear and awe, while the humans stood alert, unsure if this was rescue or judgment. From the largest ship, a tall figure stepped forward, High Counselor Theros, a man whose voice had once condemned Elira before the Empire. His eyes were cold and sharp as glass as they swept over the camp, and when they landed on her, they froze. Elira stood near the array she helped build, her hands still stained with work. For a moment, her heart forgot to beat. She hadn't seen her people's leaders since the day they tore her title away. The counselor's voice was like ice. "Princess Elira of House Lithar," he said. "We believed you dead." Elira bowed her head slightly. "I was, until the humans found me." He looked around, disgust clear in his tone. "You live among them? You serve them?" I serve no one, she said quietly. I serve what is left of my people. I help rebuild what your pride destroyed. A murmur ran through the Lithari guards behind him. The counselor's eyes narrowed. You speak of pride, yet you kneel beside those who once were our enemies. You shame your bloodline. Before she could respond, Elias stepped forward. His voice was calm but strong. With respect, counselor, she's done more for this planet than anyone else. Without her, there wouldn't be anything left to rule. The Lithari soldiers stiffened, shocked that a human dared to speak. Theros turned to him slowly. And you are? Elias Ward, he said. Engineer. Nothing special, but I've watched her rebuild your world with her own hands while everyone else turned away. Theros sneered. You think your kind understands what it means to rule? Elias took a slow breath. No, but I know what it means to care. And maybe that's what your kind forgot. The crowd fell silent. The humans watched, unsure whether to be proud or afraid. The Lithari looked between their counselor and their fallen princess, torn between old loyalty and new truth. Illyra's voice trembled, but she spoke clearly. I once believed leadership was about strength, but I learned it's about compassion, about choosing mercy when everyone else chooses hate. If that makes me weak, then I will carry that weakness proudly. Her words cut through the still air like light through storm clouds. For a long moment, no one moved. Theros's jaw tightened. You speak like a human, he said bitterly. Illyra met his gaze. Then perhaps they have taught me what it truly means to be alive. The counselor turned away in silence. He gave an order to his guards, and they began gathering supplies and scanning the area. Before leaving, he spoke one last time, his tone quieter, almost uncertain. You have chosen your path, Illyra. The council will not interfere, but do not expect to be welcomed again among your kind. She bowed her head slightly. I never asked to be. When the ships finally lifted back into the sky, the camp was silent again. Dust swirled where the engines had burned the ground, but the air felt lighter somehow, as if something heavy had finally lifted. Elias turned to her, concern in his eyes. You didn't have to stand up to them like that, he said softly. Yes, I did, she whispered. All my life I spoke for others. Today I finally spoke for myself. Elias smiled faintly. You were incredible. She looked at him, her eyes shimmering like moonlight over still water. No, she said gently. I was human. He laughed softly at that, though his eyes carried emotion. Then maybe humanity suits you. She smiled, tired but peaceful. Maybe it does. That night, as the stars burned brighter above the quiet camp, Illyra stood alone beside the humming array. She traced her fingers along its metal surface and whispered to the wind, Father, I'm not your perfect daughter anymore, but I'm still your child. I'm still trying. For the first time since the war, her heart felt light. She was no longer the fallen princess waiting for forgiveness. She was the woman who found her voice again, not through a crown, but through kindness, through courage, and through one human who believed when no one else did. The days passed slowly after the council's departure. The skies of Lithar began to clear, and the air carried the soft scent of rain. For the first time in decades, green life began to return to the planet's surface. Tiny flowers broke through the cracks of the ruined streets, their colors shining against the gray stone. Fragile, but alive. The humans continued rebuilding alongside the few Lithari who chose to stay. It was not easy. There were arguments, hunger, long nights of cold wind and little hope. But they endured. Together. And at the heart of it all stood Illyra. She no longer wore the robes of a princess. Her clothes were simple now, her hands rough and scarred, but her eyes held something brighter than any crown. Peace. Every morning she walked through the camp, helping wherever she could. She spoke gently to those who had lost family, shared food with the children, and repaired broken machines with Elias. People from both species began to look to her, not as royalty but as a guide. The humans called her the Star of Dawn, and though she often smiled shyly at the name, part of her heart warmed each time she heard it. One night, as the wind whispered softly through the old towers, Illyra stood beside the communication array, the same one she and Elias had built. Its lights blinked slowly in the dark like distant stars. Elias joined her, carrying 2 cups of warm tea. You're still awake, he said, handing her one. I couldn't sleep. She admitted softly. It's strange. When I look at the stars now, they don't seem so far away. He smiled. Maybe because you've already reached them in here, he said, tapping his chest. She laughed quietly. You always have words ready, don't you? He shrugged playfully. Maybe that's my only skill. No, she said gently, turning to face him. Your skill is hope. You see light where everyone else sees ashes. You did that for me. Her voice trembled slightly, and for a long moment neither spoke. The sound of the machines hummed softly around them like a quiet heartbeat. Elias looked up at the stars. You know, he said, when we first met I didn't think you'd survive. You looked like someone who had already given up. I had, she admitted, but then you said something I never forgot. That other people's hate doesn't define who I am. I've lived by those words ever since. He turned to her, surprised. You remembered that? She nodded. They saved me. There was a silence between them, not empty but full of understanding. After a while, Elira spoke again, her tone thoughtful. The council will never accept me again. To them, I'll always be the fallen princess. Elias took a sip of tea and smiled faintly. Then stop trying to be their princess. Be our leader, the one who gives people hope. Her eyes widened slightly. Me? Lead again? Why not? He asked. You already do. They just don't call it that yet. Elira turned her gaze back to the horizon. The first faint light of dawn began to paint the clouds in pink and gold. For a moment the sky looked almost alive, like it was breathing again. She whispered softly. My people used to believe that the dawn was the soul of a star reborn after death. Maybe I am that too. Elias looked at her and smiled. I think you are. The wind brushed gently through her hair, carrying the warmth of a new morning. She closed her eyes, letting the sunlight touch her face. For the first time since her fall, she didn't feel the weight of shame or loss. She felt whole. Behind them, the camp began to stir. Children laughed, voices rose, and fires crackled. Elira turned toward the people, humans and Lithari standing side by side, beginning another day of rebuilding. Her voice carried softly through the morning air. Tell them to prepare the fields, she said. Today we plant the first seeds. Elias smiled and nodded. Yes, ma'am. As he walked off to give the orders, Elira stood alone once more, watching the rising sun. Its light spilled across the ruined towers and touched every broken stone, turning them golden. For so long she had believed she was nothing but a fallen star. Lost, dim, forgotten. But now she understood something Elias had seen long before she did. Even a fallen star can light a new world. And as the dawn fully broke over the land, the once rejected princess smiled through her tears, whispering softly to herself, I was rejected by all, but I was never truly alone. The wind carried her words into the morning, where they blended with the songs of a world reborn, a world where hope had taken root once more. And thus ended the story of Elira, the alien princess who found light again, not through power or blood, but through the simple kindness of one human's words.